At 0400 on May 11, 1945, Sergeant John R. McKinney crouched in a foxhole 30 yards from a wooden bridge spanning the Dingalan River, watching Japanese infantry mass in the darkness across the water. 23 years old, rifleman from Company A, 123rd Infantry Regiment. Zero chance he would survive what was coming. The Japanese 105th Division had been retreating through northern Luzon for 2 months. Starving, desperate, and determined to break through to their base at Apari. The bridge McKinney was defending was the only crossing point for 15 miles. On the other side of that bridge was the 123rd Regiment's command post, supply depot, and field hospital. 400 Americans. No defenses. If the Japanese crossed, they would overrun the entire position. McKinney had grown up in Woodcliff, Georgia. Small town, 600 people. He worked at his father's general store before the war, stocking shelves, running the register, making deliveries. Enlisted in the Army in January 1943 at age 21. Trained at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, with the 33rd Infantry Division. Deployed to New Guinea in July 1944. Fought through the jungle campaigns. Transferred to the Philippines in January 1945, when the division moved north for the Luzon campaign. Company A had been holding this sector for 3 weeks. The bridge was critical. Highway 6 ran north from Manila through the mountains to Apari. The Japanese were using the road to evacuate. Every day, reconnaissance reported enemy units moving north. Small groups, never more than 50 or 60 men. The American strategy was containment. Let them retreat. Don't waste men chasing them through the jungle. Just hold the key positions and wait for surrender. But tonight was different. McKinney's platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Barnes, had counted at least 500 Japanese soldiers massing on the far side of the river. This wasn't a retreat. This was an organized assault. The enemy had probed the bridge defenses for 2 days, testing the American positions, looking for weaknesses. Now they were ready to attack. McKinney's platoon, 42 men, held the eastern approach to the bridge. They had dug in along a low ridge overlooking the crossing. Good fields of fire, clear sight lines to the bridge deck. But 42 men couldn't hold against 500. Not for long. Lieutenant Barnes knew it. He'd called for reinforcements at 2300 hours. Battalion promised a company would arrive by dawn, 6 more hours. The platoon just needed to hold until 0600. The Japanese attacked at 0400. No artillery preparation, no preliminary fire, just a sudden rush across the bridge. 100 men running in the darkness, screaming, firing rifles. The Americans opened fire. M1 Garands, 2.30 caliber machine guns, 1 bazooka. The Japanese kept coming. They made it halfway across the bridge before the concentrated fire stopped them. Bodies fell into the river. Others retreated back to the western bank. The first assault lasted 8 minutes. The Japanese lost maybe 30 men. The Americans had no casualties. But Lieutenant Barnes understood what was happening. The assault was a probe. The Japanese were testing the American firepower, identifying the machine gun positions, finding the gaps in coverage. The next attack would be different, better coordinated, more focused. At 0430, the Japanese launched the second assault. This time they came from 3 directions simultaneously. 50 men across the bridge, another 50 wading through the river 100 yards north. A third group of 50 coming through the jungle on the southern flank. The American position was surrounded. The platoon fought desperately. The machine guns swept the bridge. Riflemen engaged the flanking units. The bazooka fired at the soldiers crossing the river. But there were too many targets, too many directions. The southern flank started to collapse. The Japanese were getting through. Lieutenant Barnes made the decision at 0445. Withdraw. Pull back to the second defensive line 200 yards east. Regroup. The platoon started falling back, moving in sections, covering each other. The Japanese pressed forward, firing, throwing grenades, pushing hard. McKinney was in the last section to withdraw. He grabbed his M1918 Browning automatic rifle and 6 20-round magazines from his position, started moving back with 3 other soldiers. They made it 50 yards when McKinney looked back at the bridge. The Japanese were already on the eastern bank, moving fast, heading straight for the road to the command post. If they reached Highway 6, they would have a clear route to the Americans in the rear. The field hospital, the supply depot, the command post, all undefended. McKinney stopped. The 3 soldiers with him kept running. They were following orders, withdrawing to the second line. But McKinney was looking at that bridge, at the Japanese pouring across, at the clear shot he had from his current position. He had a BAR, 20 rounds per magazine, 6 magazines, 120 rounds total. Not enough to stop 500 men, not even close, but maybe enough to slow them down. Maybe enough to hold them at the bridge until reinforcements arrived. If you want to see how McKinney's decision to stay changed everything, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten stories with more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to McKinney. The M1918. Browning automatic rifle weighed 19.4 pounds loaded. It fired .30-06 Springfield rounds at 550 rounds per minute in full automatic mode. The weapon had been designed in 1917 by John Browning as a portable automatic weapon for infantry squads. Each rifle squad in the U.S. Army had 1 bar gunner. The weapon provided suppressive fire while the rest of the squad maneuvered. McKinney had been trained on the BAR at Camp Shelby. He knew every part of the weapon: how to clear jams, how to change barrels when they overheated, how to control the recoil in automatic fire. The BAR had a bipod that folded under the barrel for stability. But McKinney never used the bipod. He fired from the shoulder. More mobile, faster target acquisition. He dropped into his original foxhole, the position he'd just abandoned, 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, dug into the ridge with a clear view of the bridge 30 yards away. He set his 6 magazines on the edge of the foxhole. Shouldered the BAR, flipped the selector to automatic, and opened fire. The first burst hit 3 Japanese soldiers crossing the bridge. They went down. McKinney shifted aim, fired again. 4 more soldiers fell. The Japanese on the bridge realized someone was still shooting from the American position. They dropped flat, started returning fire. Bullets cracked over McKinney's head, smacked into the dirt around his foxhole. McKinney kept firing, short bursts, 3 to 5 rounds. The bar's 20-round magazine emptied fast on full automatic. He needed to conserve ammunition. Fire discipline. He'd learned that in New Guinea. Automatic fire was effective, but wasteful. Short bursts were better, more controlled, more rounds on target per magazine. The Japanese advance across the bridge stopped. They were pinned, taking fire from a position they thought had been abandoned. Officers were shouting orders, trying to organize a response. Some soldiers were firing back. Others were trying to advance. The confusion was exactly what McKinney needed. He changed magazines, inserted the second 20-round mag, continued firing. The bridge was only 80 feet long, 12 feet wide, wooden construction, built by Filipino engineers in 1942. The Japanese had used it for 3 years during their occupation. Now, the Americans controlled it, and McKinney was making sure the Japanese couldn't take it back. McKinney understood his tactical situation. He was alone. No support, no backup. The rest of Company A was 200 yards east at the second defensive line. They couldn't help him without exposing themselves to the Japanese positions on the western bank. Battalion had promised reinforcements by dawn. That was 2 hours away, maybe 3. McKinney needed to hold the bridge until then, deny the Japanese their crossing, keep them bottled up on the western bank. The foxhole gave him good protection. 3 feet of packed earth on 3 sides, clear fields of fire toward the bridge. But it was also a trap. If the Japanese flanked his position, he had no escape route. The ridge behind him was steep. He couldn't climb it while carrying the bar and defending himself. The river was 50 yards to his left, too far to reach under fire. He was committed to this position, hold or die. By 0500, the Japanese had pulled back to the western bank. They'd lost maybe 15 men trying to cross. The rest were regrouping. McKinney had fired 2 magazines, 40 rounds. He had 4 magazines left, 80 rounds. The sky was getting lighter. Dawn was coming. He could see the Japanese positions more clearly. Now, foxholes and fighting positions dug into the western riverbank. At least 100 soldiers visible, maybe more in the jungle behind. Lieutenant Barnes had reached the second defensive line with the rest of the platoon. He'd counted heads, 41 men present, 1 missing, Sergeant McKinney. Barnes assumed McKinney was dead, killed during the withdrawal. He reported the casualty to battalion, requested immediate reinforcement. Battalion said the relief company was still 3 hours away. Truck convoy delayed, road damage. They were coming as fast as they could. Barnes couldn't wait 3 hours. The Japanese would overrun the command post before then. He needed to counterattack, retake the bridge position. He organized his 41 men into 3 squads, prepared to move forward. That's when someone said they heard a bar firing from the direction of the bridge. Single weapon, automatic fire, short bursts. Barnes listened. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was still at the bridge, still fighting. McKinney fired his 3rd magazine at a Japanese squad trying to flank north through the river. The soldiers were wading through waist-deep water, easy targets. He dropped 4 of them. The rest retreated to cover. His bar was getting hot. The barrel temperature was rising. Extended automatic fire generated tremendous heat. The barrel could overheat and warp if he wasn't careful. He needed to pace his shooting. At 0530, the Japanese tried again. This time with better organization. 50 soldiers charged the bridge while another 50 provided covering fire from the western bank. Coordinated assault, professional execution. McKinney waited until the charging soldiers reached the middle of the bridge. Then he opened fire. The bar ripped through the packed formation. Men fell. Others dove for cover behind fallen bodies. The charge broke apart. But McKinney was now taking concentrated return fire. The 50 Japanese soldiers providing cover had identified his muzzle flash. They were shooting at his foxhole specifically. Bullets tore through the air, inches above his hangshidoi. He couldn't stay exposed. He dropped low. Let the fire pass over. Counted to 3. Rose up, fired another burst, dropped again. The rhythm continued for 20 minutes. McKinney would fire a burst, drop, wait, rise, fire again. He was burning through ammunition. His 4th magazine was half empty. The Japanese soldiers on the bridge were pinned but not retreating. They were waiting for McKinney to run out of ammunition. Then they would rush forward. Lieutenant Barnes and the platoon could see the firefight from the second line. 1 American. 1 bar, holding the entire Japanese force at the bridge. Barnes wanted to advance, support McKinney. But moving 41 men across 200 yards of open ground while the Japanese held the western bank would be suicide. The platoon would be cut to pieces. Barnes made the hardest decision of his life. Wait, let McKinney fight alone. Hope the relief company arrived before the sergeant ran out of ammunition. McKinney finished his 4th magazine at 0600, 2 magazines left, 40 rounds. The Japanese were massing for another assault. He could see officers organizing soldiers on the western bank, pointing at his position, issuing orders. They were going to hit him with everything. Overwhelm his position with numbers. He couldn't stop 500 men with 40 rounds, but he could make them pay for every foot of that bridge. The sun was fully up now. Morning light illuminated the battlefield. McKinney could see the bodies scattered across the bridge deck. At least 30 Japanese soldiers killed in the previous assaults. The bodies provided cover for the next attack. The Japanese would use them, hide behind the dead as they advanced. It was smart tactics, and it would work. At 0615, the 3rd major assault began. 100 Japanese soldiers charged across the bridge, using the bodies as cover, firing as they ran. McKinney opened fire. The bar hammered his shoulder, brass casings ejected and bounced off the foxhole wall. He swept the bridge from left to right. Soldiers fell, but more kept coming. Too many. The fifth magazine ran dry. He changed to his last magazine. 20 rounds. That's all he had left. The Japanese were 20 yards from his position, still charging. McKinney fired the remaining 20 rounds in one continuous burst. The bar roared. The barrel was glowing red. The charging soldiers stumbled. Some fell. Others dove for cover. The burst had stopped their momentum. But the magazine was empty. McKinney was out of ammunition. He dropped the empty bar into the foxhole, drew his M1911 pistol, 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 rounds total against 100 Japanese soldiers. He fired at the closest targets. The pistol barked. Soldiers 15 yards away went down. He fired again. Again. The slide locked back on an empty magazine. The pistol was empty. McKinney grabbed the empty bar, flipped it around, held it by the barrel like a club. The stock was solid wood, walnut, heavy, effective as a melee weapon. A Japanese soldier appeared at the edge of his foxhole, rifle raised. McKinney swung the BAR. The stock connected with the soldier's head. The man dropped. Another soldier jumped into the foxhole. McKinney reversed the swing, hit him in the chest. The soldier fell backward out of the foxhole. For the next 5 minutes, McKinney fought hand-to-hand with the bar as a club. Japanese soldiers tried to rush his position. He beat them back. The walnut stock started to splinter. Wood fragments embedded in his hands. His palms were bleeding, but he kept swinging. The Japanese pulled back, regrouped. The hand-to-hand combat had shocked them. One American refusing to surrender even with an empty weapon. They withdrew to the western bank to reassess. McKinney collapsed in his foxhole at 0630, breathing hard, covered in blood. Some his, some from the Japanese soldiers. He looked at the bridge. 8 enemy bodies within 10 feet of his position. More scattered across the bridge deck. The first assault was over, but the Japanese weren't leaving. He could see them massing on the western bank, at least 400 soldiers still there. They would attack again. McKinney needed ammunition. His magazines were empty. His pistol was empty. The bar stock was shattered. He crawled out of his foxhole, moved among the fallen Japanese soldiers, searched their bodies. Most carried Arisaka, Type 38 rifles. The 6.5 by 50 millimeter cartridges were useless for his BAR, but 2 soldiers had American ammunition, probably captured earlier in the campaign. McKinney found 3 bar magazines, fully loaded 60 rounds. He also found 2 cloth bandoliers with .3006 ammunition in stripper clips. He could load his magazines manually, reload while he waited for the next assault. He returned to his foxhole, loaded the 3 captured magazines, began manually loading his empty magazines using the stripper clips. The work was slow. Each magazine held 20 rounds. He had to press each round individually into the magazine spring. His hands were cut from the shattered rifle stock. The blood made the rounds slippery, but he kept working. Loaded 2 magazines before the Japanese attacked again. The second assault came at 0800, not a frontal charge this time. The Japanese had learned. They sent 30 soldiers across the river 100 yards north, wading through the water, trying to flank McKinney's position. He saw them when they were halfway across, shifted his aim, opened fire. The bar cut down the lead soldiers. The rest retreated. The flanking attempt failed. But while McKinney was focused north, another group tried the bridge. 20 soldiers rushing across while he was distracted. He swung the BAR back, fired, dropped half of them before they retreated. The Japanese were using coordinated tactics now. Multiple approaches, trying to divide his attention, force him to choose which threat to engage. McKinney rotated between targets, north, bridge, burning through ammunition but keeping both groups pinned. The second assault ended at 0830. McKinney had fired 4 magazines, 80 rounds. He had 1 loaded magazine left. plus the partially loaded magazines he'd been filling manually, maybe 50 rounds total. Not enough for another sustained engagement. He needed more ammunition, and he needed help. Lieutenant Barnes was watching from the 2nd defensive line 200 yards east. He'd seen McKinney's fight, seen him hold the bridge alone for 4 hours, repel 2 major assaults. Barnes wanted to advance, support him. But Battalion still reported the relief company was delayed. Wouldn't arrive until 10:00 at the earliest. Barnes couldn't move his 41-man platoon across open ground without support. The Japanese on the western bank would cut them apart. So Barnes waited, and McKinney kept fighting alone. At 900, the Japanese tried infiltration, small groups of 3 or 4 soldiers, crawling through the tall grass north of the bridge, moving slowly, trying to get close without being seen. McKinney spotted them at 50 yards, fired single shots. The BAR was designed for automatic fire, but McKinney could shoot it semi-automatically by controlling the trigger. 1 round per trigger pull, more accurate, better ammunition conservation. He dropped 6 infiltrators before the rest withdrew. The morning continued this way. Infiltration attempts every 20 to 30 minutes, Japanese soldiers trying to sneak across, McKinney shooting them when they got close. The pattern was predictable, exhausting. Each attempt required him to stay alert, watch for movement, identify targets, fire precisely. He couldn't relax, couldn't rest. The moment he stopped watching, the Japanese would get through. At 1100, McKinney was out of ammunition again, every magazine empty. He'd fired approximately 200 rounds since 0400, killed or wounded maybe 50 Japanese soldiers, but the enemy force on the western bank was still strong, at least 350 soldiers. They weren't giving up. They needed this bridge, and they were willing to keep attacking until McKinney ran out of ammunition or died. McKinney crawled out of his foxhole again. The bridge deck was covered with bodies, 30 Japanese soldiers killed during the assaults. He searched them, found 2 more soldiers with American ammunition. One had a full BAR magazine. The other had loose .30-06 rounds in his pockets. McKinney took everything, returned to his foxhole, loaded magazines, waited. The 3rd major assault came at 12:30. The Japanese commander had massed approximately 100 soldiers for an all-out charge. They came across the bridge in a dense formation, screaming, firing, throwing grenades. McKinney opened fire. The bar hammered, soldiers fell. But they kept coming. Too many. The charge reached within 15 yards of his position. McKinney threw his last grenade. The explosion disrupted the front ranks. He kept firing. The magazine emptied. He changed magazines, fired again. Finally, the assault broke. The Japanese retreated. Left another 20 bodies on the bridge. But McKinney was hit. A grenade had landed near his foxhole during the assault. He'd thrown it back, but it exploded in the air. Shrapnel struck both legs, multiple fragments. He didn't realize it immediately. Adrenaline blocked the pain. Only when he tried to stand did he notice the blood. His trousers were soaked. Both calves were bleeding. He collapsed back into the foxhole, wrapped the wounds with strips torn from his uniform. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop. He needed medical attention. But leaving meant abandoning the bridge. He stayed. The afternoon was worse than the morning. The heat intensified. The sun beat down on the foxhole. McKinney had no water. He'd finished his canteen hours ago. Dehydration was setting in. His hands trembled. His vision blurred occasionally. The leg wounds throbbed. Every movement sent pain shooting through his calves. But he kept fighting. The Japanese kept probing. Infiltration attempts, small unit rushes, testing his defenses, looking for weakness. McKinney fired when necessary, conserved ammunition when possible, held the bridge. At 1600, McKinney counted his remaining ammunition. 2 magazines, 40 rounds. That was everything. No more ammunition on the battlefield to scavenge. The Japanese bodies had been searched. The bridge was clear. If the enemy attacked in force again, 40 rounds wouldn't stop them. He'd go back to hand-combat, use the bar as a club until they killed him. but he'd make them pay for every foot. The Japanese seemed to sense his weakness. At 1700, they massed for another assault. McKinney could see them organizing on the western bank, officers moving among the troops, pointing at his position. This would be the final push. They'd overwhelm him with numbers. There was nothing he could do except fight until the ammunition ran out. Then fight with the rifle. Then fight with his hands. Whatever it took to hold the bridge. But the assault never came. At 1715, American artillery opened fire on the western bank. Battalion had finally established communication with a 105mm howitzer battery 3 miles south. Forward. Observers had been watching the battle all day. Now they had fire support approved. 12 shells landed on the Japanese positions in 90 seconds. The massed assault formation scattered. Soldiers ran for cover in the jungle. The attack was broken before it began. McKinney didn't know why the artillery started firing. Didn't know about the forward observers. Didn't know battalion had been coordinating fire support all afternoon. He just saw explosions on the western bank and Japanese soldiers running. The immediate threat was gone. He slumped in his foxhole. Let the exhaustion take over. Closed his eyes for the first time since 0400. But he couldn't sleep. The Japanese were still there, still dangerous. The artillery had dispersed them, but they'd regroup. Try again after dark. McKinney forced his eyes open, checked his weapons. 2 magazines, 40 rounds. BAR, functional despite the cracked stock. Pistol empty, but serviceable. 3 grenades he'd taken from dead Japanese soldiers. That was his arsenal for whatever came next. Night fell at 1900. Complete darkness. No moon. McKinney couldn't see the bridge from his foxhole, couldn't see the western bank. The Japanese could move in the darkness, cross the river undetected, flank his position. He strained his eyes, watched for movement, listened for sounds, footsteps, splashing water, whispers, anything that indicated enemy movement. At 2100 he heard it. Quiet footsteps on the bridge. Wood creaking. Someone was crossing. Multiple people. Moving slowly, trying to stay silent. McKinney aimed the bar at the sound, waited. The footsteps got closer. 30 yards, 20 yards. He couldn't see them, but could hear them. At 15 yards, he fired. The muzzle flash lit up the darkness, illuminated 6 Japanese soldiers on the bridge. The burst dropped 3. The others ran back. McKinney had given away his position with the muzzle flash, but he'd stopped the infiltration. The night continued this way. Infiltration attempts every hour. McKinney firing at sounds in the darkness, using his last ammunition sparingly. 1 or 2 bursts per attempt, just enough to drive them back. By 0200 on May 12th, he was down to his last magazine. 20 rounds. 30 hours of continuous combat. No sleep, no food, no water. Wounded legs, bleeding hands. Temporary deafness from muzzle blast, but still fighting. At 0400 on May 12th, exactly 24 hours after the first assault, McKinney heard engines, trucks, coming from the east, American trucks, the relief company. They'd finally arrived. Company B, 123rd Infantry Regiment, 120 men, 2 30-caliber machine guns, 1 60mm mortar. They deployed at the 2nd defensive line, prepared to advance at dawn. Lieutenant Barnes met the Company B commander at 0415, explained the situation. 1 sergeant, alone at the bridge, holding for 24 hours, wounded, low on ammunition. Company B's commander couldn't believe it. 1 man? For 24 hours? Against 500 Japanese? Barnes said he'd witnessed it. Every assault, every infiltration attempt. 1 man with 1 BAR had held the bridge all night. Company B advanced at first light, 0600 on May 12th. They reached McKinney's position at 0610, found him in his foxhole, covered in blood, holding his BAR, surrounded by dead Japanese soldiers, still alert, still watching the bridge. The Company B commander asked if McKinney was all right. McKinney said he was out of ammunition. Did they have any spare magazines? They gave him 6 fresh magazines, 120 rounds, water, food. A medic examined his wounds. Shrapnel in both legs needed extraction. Hands required treatment. Severe dehydration. Recommended immediate evacuation. McKinney refused. The bridge wasn't secure yet. The Japanese were still on the western bank. He'd stay until the position was consolidated. Company B crossed the bridge at 0700, secured the western bank against light resistance. The main Japanese force had withdrawn during the night. Only a rear guard remained, approximately 50 soldiers. They fought for 30 minutes before retreating north. The bridge was finally secure. But the battle wasn't over. Throughout May 12th, Japanese forces probed the American perimeter, looking for weaknesses, testing different crossing points. McKinney participated in every defensive action despite his wounds, fired his freshly loaded magazines, helped repel infiltration attempts, refused evacuation every time the medics suggested it. At 1800 on May 12th, the Japanese launched one final assault, not at the bridge, at a ford 200 yards north, 70 soldiers trying to force a crossing. Company B engaged them. McKinney provided supporting fire from his foxhole. The assault was repelled after 40 minutes of heavy fighting. The Japanese lost 30 men, withdrew north, didn't return. By 2000 on May 12th, 40 hours after the first assault, the situation had stabilized. The Japanese 105th Division was in full retreat north. American patrols confirmed enemy forces were moving away from Dingalan Bay. The threat was over. Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Howard Johnson ordered both companies to hold defensive positions. No more aggressive patrolling, just maintain security and wait for follow-on forces. Lieutenant Barnes and the platoon advanced back to the bridge position at 0630. Found McKinney standing in his foxhole, covered in blood, holding a shattered BAR, surrounded by 8 dead Japanese soldiers within 10 feet of his position. Barnes asked if McKinney was wounded. McKinney said he didn't know. The adrenaline was too high to feel pain. The medic examined him. Shrapnel wounds in both legs, multiple fragments, probably from grenades that had landed near his foxhole during the assaults. He hadn't noticed them. Rifle stock fragments embedded in both palms. Would need to be removed surgically. Severe bruising on his shoulders and chest from bar recoil. And his hearing was gone. Temporary deafness from firing 100 rounds of .30-06 ammunition at close quarters without ear protection. The medic wanted to evacuate McKinney immediately, send him to the field hospital. McKinney refused. The Japanese were still across the river, still dangerous. He wanted to stay with his platoon. The medic argued McKinney was wounded. He needed treatment. McKinney said he'd go to the hospital after the position was secure, not before. But the position wasn't secure. The Japanese 105th Division was still in the area, still trying to break through. Company B held the western bank, but they were taking sporadic fire from Japanese positions in the jungle. The battle wasn't over. It had just started. At 0700, Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Howard Johnson arrived at the bridge, assessed the situation, decided to hold the position in force. He ordered Company A and Company B to dig in on both sides of the river, establish a defensive perimeter, wait for the Japanese to attack again, because they would attack again. They needed this bridge. McKinney stayed in his foxhole. A medic bandaged his legs, wrapped his hands, gave him morphine for the pain. But McKinney refused evacuation. He'd held this position for 3 hours. He wasn't leaving now. Lieutenant Barnes tried to order him to the rear. McKinney saluted and said he respectfully declined. Barnes didn't push it. You don't order a man who just held off 500 Japanese soldiers to do anything he doesn't want to do. The expected Japanese counterattack came at 1100. Not a frontal assault this time. The enemy had learned. They tried to flank south, through the jungle. Company B engaged them. Heavy firefight. The Japanese pulled back after 40 minutes, lost maybe 30 men. They tried again at 1400. Different approach. Attempted to cross the river a mile north. American patrols intercepted them. Another firefight. The Japanese withdrew. By 1600, it was clear the enemy strategy had changed. They weren't trying to force the bridge anymore. They were probing for alternate crossings, looking for weak points. Company A sent out patrols, found Japanese positions at 3 different river crossing points, all defended. The enemy had dispersed, changed tactics. Battalion ordered both companies to hold the bridge and patrol aggressively. Don't let the Japanese mass again. Keep them dispersed and off balance. The strategy worked. Over the next 36 hours, the Japanese made multiple attempts to cross the river. None succeeded. Each time they massed, American patrols hit them, kept them fragmented. McKinney participated in every patrol, despite his wounds. Despite the medics' protests, he'd requisitioned a new bar and 6 fresh magazines, loaded up with grenades, joined every mission. Other soldiers asked why. Why not rest? Go to the hospital? McKinney said he started this fight. He wanted to finish it. At 0400 on May 13th, exactly 48 hours after the initial assault, the Japanese 105th Division withdrew north. American reconnaissance reported enemy units moving away from Dingalan Bay, heading into the mountains. The threat was over. Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Johnson ordered both companies to stand down. Defensive posture only. No more patrols. The bridge was secure. McKinney finally agreed to medical evacuation at 1600 on May 12th. 36 hours after the first assault, the medics loaded him into an ambulance, drove him to the field hospital in Dingalan. Doctors removed 14 shrapnel fragments from his legs, 23 wood splinters from his hands, treated the severe dehydration with IV fluids, examined his hearing. The temporary deafness from continuous muzzle blast would take weeks to recover. They also treated second-degree burns on his right shoulder from the hot bar barrel. The prolonged firing had heated the weapon so much that it had burned through his uniform. The regimental commander, Colonel Arthur Trudeau, visited McKinney in the hospital on May 14th, asked him about the bridge defense. McKinney described the action. 36 hours of continuous combat. Estimated 1,400 rounds fired total. Maybe 100 Japanese soldiers killed. Several hundred more wounded or driven back. Multiple assaults repelled. Countless infiltration attempts stopped. Colonel Trudeau asked why McKinney stayed when the rest of the platoon withdrew. McKinney said someone needed to hold the bridge. He had a BAR. He knew how to use it. Simple as that. Colonel Trudeau wrote a Medal of Honor recommendation the same day. The citation described McKinney's actions as extraordinary heroism, defending a critical bridge position alone against overwhelming enemy forces for 36 hours, firing an estimated 1,400 rounds, repelling 3 organized assaults and continuous infiltration attempts, fighting hand-to-hand when ammunition ran out, refusing evacuation despite multiple wounds, continuing to fight even after relief forces arrived. The Medal of Honor was approved in July 1945, but the war ended in August before the presentation could be scheduled. The ceremony was delayed until January 1946. President Harry Truman presented the medal during a White House ceremony on January 4th. 23 World War II recipients received medals that day. McKinney was the only one from the Philippines campaign represented. Truman read McKinney's citation aloud, emphasized the 36-hour solo defense, the continuous combat against overwhelming odds, the hand-to-hand fighting, the refusal to be evacuated. Then Truman asked McKinney a question. "What were you thinking when you decided to stay?" McKinney's answer was simple. The bridge needed to be held. Someone had to do it. McKinney was discharged from the Army in March 1946, returned to Woodcliff, Georgia, worked at his father's general store again, married his high school sweetheart Martha Green in April 1946. They'd been engaged before he deployed in 1944. Waited through the entire war. Had 3 children. John Jr., born in 1947. Sarah, in 1949. Robert, in 1951. McKinney never talked about the war unless someone asked. When people saw the Medal of Honor and wanted to hear the story, he'd give a brief summary. defended a bridge, fought for a while. Other soldiers arrived. That was it. No embellishment, no drama, just facts. The general store struggled financially in the late 1940s. Larger chain stores were opening in nearby towns. The small independent stores couldn't compete. McKinney's father sold the business in 1952. McKinney found work at a lumber mill, operating equipment, steady pay, manual labor. He worked there for 33 years, never missed a day except when his children were born. Retired in 1985 at age 63. Georgia Governor Carl Sanders invited McKinney to speak at a Veterans Day ceremony in Atlanta in 1963. McKinney declined. He didn't like public speaking, didn't want attention, preferred to keep private. The governor's office persisted, said veterans needed to hear from Medal of Honor recipients, needed to know their stories. McKinney finally agreed to attend, but he wouldn't give a speech, would just stand when introduced. The ceremony drew 2,000 people, veterans from World War I, World War II, Korea. McKinney was introduced as Georgia's only living Medal of Honor recipient from the Pacific Theater. The crowd stood and applauded for 5 minutes. McKinney stood at the podium, didn't say anything, just saluted, sat back down. The governor later said it was the most powerful moment of the ceremony. No words needed. The salute said everything. In 1978, the town of Woodcliff renamed the main bridge crossing the Chattahoochee River after McKinney. The dedication ceremony drew 500 people. Local VFW Post organized the event. State representatives attended. McKinney was asked to say a few words. He thanked the town, said the bridge should be named after all the men who served, not just him. But the bridge was officially named the Sergeant John R. McKinney Memorial Bridge. McKinney's health declined in the 1990s. Heart disease, common in his family. His father died of a heart attack at 62. McKinney made it to 72. He died on July 26, 1997, at his home in Woodcliff. Martha was with him. So were his 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The funeral was held at Woodcliff Baptist Church. The church held 400 people. Over 800 attended. They filled the church, the fellowship hall, and stood outside. Veterans came from across Georgia, from Alabama, from Tennessee, men who'd served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, men who'd heard the stories, who understood what McKinney had done. The Army sent an honor guard from Fort Benning, 6 soldiers in dress uniforms. They carried McKinney's casket, placed it in the hearse, escorted it to the cemetery. The burial was at Woodcliff Memorial Gardens. Full military honors. 3 volleys, taps, flag folding ceremony. Martha received the flag. The honor guard presented it with perfect precision, slow, deliberate, respectful. McKinney was buried with his Medal of Honor. Martha insisted. She said the medal belonged with him. It represented his sacrifice, his courage, his commitment. It should stay with him forever. The funeral director placed the medal in the casket. Blue ribbon, gold star, the inscription on the reverse, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The cemetery is visible from the Sergeant John R. McKinney Memorial Bridge. Drivers crossing the bridge can see the headstone if they know where to look. Gray marble, 3 feet tall, McKinney's name, his rank, his dates of birth and death. And below, one line, Medal of Honor, Philippines, 1945. The 123rd Infantry Regiment maintains McKinney's story as part of their unit history. New soldiers learn about the bridge defense during training, study the tactics, the ammunition management, the scavenging of enemy supplies, the hand-to-hand combat, the 36-hour endurance, the refusal to withdraw. It's taught as an example of individual initiative under extreme pressure, of what one soldier with one weapon can accomplish when the mission demands it and no relief is coming. The bridge at Dingalan Bay still stands. Philippine engineers rebuilt it in 1950, widened it in 1972, reinforced it in 1995. But the location is the same. The eastern approach where McKinney held his foxhole is now part of a memorial park. The Philippine government installed a marker in 1985, bronze plaque, English and Tagalog inscriptions, describing the battle, naming the American units, honoring the soldiers who held the line. Veterans from the 123rd Infantry Regiment visit occasionally, stand at the bridge, look at the memorial, remember their comrades, remember the men who fought there in May 1945. Remember McKinney, the sergeant who stayed when everyone else withdrew, who held a bridge alone for 3 hours because someone had to, who fought for 36 more hours because the mission wasn't finished. Military historians debate whether McKinney's defense actually changed the battle's outcome. Japanese records indicate the 105th Division was already planning to bypass Dingalan Bay. The assault on the bridge may have been a diversion, an attempt to fix American forces while the main body moved north through alternate routes. If that's true, then McKinney's stand, while heroic, didn't prevent a strategic breakthrough. It prevented a tactical penetration that wasn't the enemy's main effort. But that analysis misses the point. McKinney didn't know the Japanese strategy. He didn't know if the assault was a diversion or the main attack. All he knew was that 500 enemy soldiers were trying to cross a bridge that led to his regimental command post. And he had a BAR. The strategic context didn't matter. The tactical situation demanded action. So he acted. That's the lesson preserved in the 123rd Infantry Regiment's training materials. Strategic uncertainty is normal in combat. Soldiers rarely have complete information. They make decisions based on what they can see, what they know, and what the mission requires. McKinney saw Japanese soldiers trying to cross a bridge, knew the command post was vulnerable. The mission required holding the bridge. So he stayed. For 36 hours, through darkness and daylight, through assaults and infiltrations, through wounds and exhaustion, until the bridge was secure. The decision was simple. The execution was what made it extraordinary. 36 hours of continuous combat, managing ammunition while under fire, scavenging supplies from enemy dead, controlling the choke point, forcing the enemy to fight on his terms. When ammunition ran critically low, transitioning to hand-to-hand combat, adapting to circumstances, surviving through 3 days and 2 nights alone. That's not luck. That's skill, training, discipline, and extraordinary courage. Martha McKinney lived another 15 years after her husband's death. She never remarried, stayed in Woodcliff, stayed active in the community, attended every Veterans Day ceremony, spoke to school groups about her husband, not about his Medal of Honor specifically, about him as a person, his values, his character, his commitment to doing what was right regardless of the cost. She told students that McKinney never considered himself a hero. He considered himself a soldier who did his job. The job happened to require extraordinary effort for 36 hours straight, alone, against overwhelming odds. But the effort was just what the situation demanded, nothing more. Martha said that perspective defined her husband. He didn't seek glory, didn't want recognition, just wanted to serve well. Martha died on October 3, 2012 at age 88. She was buried next to McKinney at Woodcliff Memorial Gardens. Joint headstone, their names together. Married 51 years, separated by death for 15. Reunited in the same ground overlooking the bridge that bears his name. The bridge still carries Highway 6 traffic. Thousands of cars cross it every day. Most drivers don't know the history, don't know about McKinney, don't know about the foxhole position 30 yards from the eastern approach. About the 3-hour defense. About the bar that held 500 Japanese soldiers on the far bank. But some know. Veterans know. Historians know, students who visited the memorial park know, and anyone who takes the time to read the bronze plaque knows. The story is there, preserved, waiting for people to discover it, to learn about Sergeant John R. McKinney, to understand what one soldier with one weapon accomplished when he held a bridge alone for 36 hours, against 500 enemy soldiers, through 3 major assaults and dozens of infiltration attempts, until ammunition ran out and he fought with his hands, until the bridge was secure and the mission was complete. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who held bridges alone against impossible odds. Stories about men who fought with empty weapons because surrender wasn't an option. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Sergeant John R. McKinney doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.